Hello everybody and welcome back to another video of Baduk Mindset. Today we're going to be talking about memorization and Go. It's quite topical, seeing as that we just finished a video on joseki, but yeah, so what is memorization? How does it work in regards to Go? Well, there are basically spaced repetition systems, which are basically flashcards, except with the crux that the more often you answer a flashcard right, the longer it is until you see it the next time. And so what this means is that you spend less time focusing on cards that you know and spend more time focusing on cards that you struggle with. And this way you get to focus on your weak points and while still kind of memorizing what you're trying to memorize. There are different tools that you might use for this. For instance, when it comes to Go, there's Anki and various add-ons. Those can change a little bit over time. I'm not quite up to date with them. And then there's also AI Sensei, which allows you to memorize different board positions. So that's the tool that I've been using at the moment. Um, so that's basically a small introduction, but I also wanted to quickly outline what my history is, because I've used memorization for a long time, since roughly 2016, 2017, and I think that my relationship with it has been fraught. On the one hand, I think that it helps a lot to learn various things that might be difficult to memorize or difficult to keep in memory. On the other hand, I think that an over-reliance on memorization can be based on um, not properly understanding how to learn, and that forgetting is part of learning, and that learning also isn't necessarily just remembering and never forgetting something. It's a bit more complicated than that. So, yeah, I have used memorization to memorize a lot of, or spaced repetition systems to memorize a lot of joseki. That was quite useful. This is in the pre-AI era. A lot of those joseki are no longer relevant anymore, unfortunately. But I think that it helped me to gain a couple of stones when I started using it, because it meant that I was stronger in the opening and I had a better understanding of positions. But at the same time, that advancement was kind of short-lived. It meant that after a while, that was no longer the problem in my game, and I needed to find other ways, my other weaknesses, in order to improve. If this is a kind of new concept, you can watch my video that I shot on how to improve. But basically, the idea is to focus on the things that are holding you back the most, and eventually, joseki just isn't what's holding you back the most. And so memorization only got me so far, and when it stopped working, it landed me in a plateau, and I got pretty frustrated pretty quickly. I think I've broken out of this plateau now because now I found ways to remedy those other parts of my game. But it was quite a painful couple of years that I lost because, I guess lost is perhaps making it maybe a bit too dramatic, but those were a painful couple of years because I was stuck and I didn't know why. And I was wondering, like, oh, is it because of my inherent Go ability or what is it? Meanwhile, I also use spaced repetition systems at university, where I spend a lot of time creating cards and using that to learn the material. But the issue is that at university, there's just so much to learn. There's way too much to learn. So if you're going to use something that's so exhaustive, eventually, if you don't know how to apply it in the right way, you're going to end up wasting too much time, and it affected my grades really, really badly. Um, so I don't want to get into that too much because it's not necessarily the point of this video, but what I want to outline is that I have a long history with this, and so I mean, the reason why I want to make this video is because I think, like, on the one hand, I think people come across spaced repetition systems and think, oh, this is really great, and then they're all in. And then once you use it, you realize, oh, there are some drawbacks. And then I became really cynical about it. And now I think I've come to a happy medium where it's kind of useful. It's not a godsend, but at the same time, yeah, it's something to look into. So let's talk about this. What does memorizing and learning problems do for you? So what it does is it basically expands your knowledge. Problem that you've remembered is a problem that you're not going to have to remember to solve. And so what this means is that if you have it's really good for learning things that you should consider knowledge. So joseki and basically essential life and death, where these are things that you should be so familiar with that you shouldn't have to think about them too much. And the more you know, the more that you have this knowledge, and to the extent that you don't have it, it's going to be useful for you. Um, but here's the issue. As I mentioned, learning isn't just remembering or not forgetting. Like, knowing a joseki is about having enough practical experience with that joseki, what people are likely to play, what mistakes you're likely to make, and having remedied that enough times so that the joseki becomes yours in a way, because you've done the hard work to integrate it. Whereas joseki does some of that work, or not joseki, memorizing does some of that work for you, but it still doesn't do, it can't give you that practical experience. Although it can give you a good base to start from. Hmm. So one thing I want to talk about more is, so the big thing to be careful about with memorization. Let me quickly go to the browser. Is I work by day as a data scientist. So there's one thing, a concept that we learn called, when it comes to generalize it, how well models can generalize or how well models learn. So in statistics, we make this really big comparison between models learning and real life learning. And so there are some things that you can learn from that. So here are some diagrams where we have some size of something, and the bigger this thing gets, the more expensive this thing gets up until a point. So there are diminishing returns on how big this thing can be, and its price. I'm not quite sure what this thing is, but that's not necessarily important. What's important is that this red line is trying to capture this pattern, but it doesn't have enough parameters in order to perfectly capture this data. And so it says, okay, well, this price is generally going up, but it fails to capture that there's this kind of asymptote here, and it kind of carries on into infinity. Um, so when you learn a joseki for the first time, you might learn the basic outline, but you forget all the details, or you don't necessarily learn them. And on the other extreme, you have a lot of parameters. You have a model that's able to learn a lot. But what happens is that it says, okay, well, I'm going to try and pass through everything, and I'm going to contort this line in such a way to minimize the error between the red line and the green crosses. And this way we'll have the best model. But the issue is that if we follow the general trend of these green lines, we can think of, for instance, an out of sample data point being over here, and now the error between these two lines, between these 2 points, is quite big. So the distance is quite big. And what this means is that it's learning very well the training sets, but not generalizing very well to data that it hasn't seen before. And what we want is to have this nice line that's going through all of the points in the kind of pattern that we would expect by visually inspecting it. So when you're using memorization, you're basically using your mind and having it make very arbitrary connections such that it functions more as this kind of a model that has a lot of flexibility, that's able to understand everything that you're throwing at it, but that doesn't necessarily generalize because it's only seen what it's seen so far, and it's trying so hard to match that it has struggles to generalize. And so this is kind of what forgetting does. Forgetting means that you don't need to remember all of the junk. It means that you remember only the things that you have to remember. And that's what happens if you play a lot of games. Then you'll come across many examples, and those over time, through forgetting all of the things that will never appear again, and most of the things in Go will basically never appear again because the game is so large and random, that you learn a lot better in this way. All this is to say is to kind of give this idea of underfitting versus overfitting. And when you're memorizing, even in machine learning, the idea of overfitting is compared directly to memorizing for statisticians or data scientists who are learning the field. So this is something a little bit interesting. And yeah, I hope that already helps a little bit to understand what memorization is, how it can be useful, and what its drawbacks are, because it has some pretty sharp drawbacks. Doesn't mean you shouldn't use it, but it can be a bit difficult. So anyway, back to the talk. I quickly interrupt my talk in order to talk about how I would memorize something. So one interesting thing is that you have to think about what branches you want to memorize and which ones you don't. You only want to keep the things that you are likely to play in your games, and you should only really remember things that you want to play yourself. So here's a joseki that I mentioned in the last video, and we discussed a little bit about, say, for instance, black peeping here. So as I mentioned in that video, but if you didn't, what might happen is white might play here, but this means that black might get a move over here, meaning that maybe black is aiming at something like this, and this group might get, it's not weak, but it will become a bit weaker. And so we want to prevent that. So what we can try to do is play over here, but then if black pushes, if white pushes, and this is a mistake, and I've marked it as a mistake as such, that black will push again, white will extend, and I don't want to learn this move either because it's a mistake, and then black will come back. So here I only want to learn this from black's side. White makes a good move, I play, and then if white makes a mistake, I don't memorize that move. What I should memorize instead is the correct move, which is playing this cut. Another mistake might be black playing over here. This is something that confused me in the last video. There's a ladder right here that white can take, and in the case that white somehow doesn't have the ladder, white can still defend over here. So for instance, these are some variations to memorize. And okay, so we make this exchange. White plays this 1 point jump, and black will normally push up here, and white will make this exchange. Black should come up, or shouldn't come up. This is a mistake, but this is probably the most likely thing that you'll see. Black should really capture, because the result if they come up this way isn't good for them. White will play this way, and then if black pushes again, which is another mistake, white will Atari and turn, and these stones are now dead. So this is why black shouldn't play this way. So what this means is that if this exchange happens, white should capture, or black should capture, Atari, connect, and then it's a little bit open as to what happens, but this is what I'll be remembering. So something along these lines. White still, yeah, there's a way to analyze this, but for instance, like if I'm going to memorize it, I should know the reasoning for why this position is evaluated the way how it is, instead of just remembering arbitrary moves. So that's something I should look into deeper. Always something that I need to look into deeper when I try to use this joseki as an example. Let's see. And here's another idea. So say that black doesn't peep and white plays this one. This N18 is a mistake because it no longer works. White can play something like here, and if black tries to cut, then black doesn't have enough liberties. Therefore, well, I guess, yeah. So if white connects, then black will be able to connect out like that. So for instance, this would be 2 mistakes. And if there are 2 mistakes, then I don't memorize this M17 move, because both players have made mistakes, and you don't want to be memorizing variations where both players make mistakes. So anyway, I just wanted to quickly go through and give this principle that you should only memorize the things that you would rather play yourself. If multiple players make mistakes, then you just don't learn that variation. And if one player makes a mistake, then you learn the answer from one person's side. And hopefully that should already prune a lot of the variations that you'd need to learn. All right, now back to the talk. So as I mentioned, Go is a game with infinite variations in positions, and positions that appear will basically never appear again. And so while it can be useful to expand your knowledge, you have to really look at a position and say, is this something that will appear again? Is this something that I can turn into knowledge? And if not, you shouldn't memorize it, because it's just a waste of time, and it will just get you to memorize something that will be different with a different context, as the next board position will be different. And so, yeah, don't memorize things that will never happen again. And don't neglect other parts of your game. So for instance, life and death, game experience, shape to Suji, that's all really important. And memorization isn't going to make you 9 done. It's going to help you maybe gain a couple of stones, and then eventually that's going to run out. And then maybe you might continue memorizing. Like at the moment I memorize, but that's just for fun. And I acknowledge that can bring some disadvantages into my game. And yeah, so have realistic expectations. You may improve in the short term, but don't expect all of your gains to come from this. And yeah, the basic pros and cons is that you'll have good priors for many positions if you've memorized a lot of joseki. Your opening will improve, and you'll be able to remember more obscure things and have more interesting games possibly. But the issue is that you'll still make the mistakes anyway, so it's still not a surefire solution, and that's even necessary to improving. It will give you a lot of fixed ideas that won't generalize to new positions, and so you'll think, oh, I must play here, and it's something I've noticed in my recent games. I play more quickly because I'm more sure of myself when I shouldn't be. And there is a large time investment to learn many joseki. And if knowledge isn't a weak part of your game, then it will not always help you to improve. Anyway, I just wanted to go over quickly about what this is and how you can apply it better. And I hope that it doesn't hold you back as much as it held me back, or the lack of solutions. I hope that this channel helps you more in general. That's kind of why I make this Baduk Mindset videos, because these are things I learned along the way on my long career of playing Go and things I wish I knew. But anyway, if you enjoy this kind of content, then like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, notifications, all the kind of stuff. Looking forward to the next video, and I'll see you all there.